Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is very exciting to welcome Jennifer on the Mythology Cafe. Hi, hi. This is fun because I reference hypnagogia and hypnopompia, and then in association with that, with your book. And your work quite regularly. So months ago, I thought it would be super fun to actually have you here and do your thing. The workshop you did for, I know that was at the San Francisco Dharma Collective, but was it? I think it was your workshop, right?
It was my workshop.
Yeah, that was so cool. So yeah,
it was great to have you there too. It's always super fun to have people who already work with hypnagogia and hypnopomia, so that's cool.
Well, I didn't know they had names, so that was really exciting.
It's actually super. It's one of the things I get most often.
Yeah. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you. You are co-host, so you should be able to share your screen and do whatever you need to also, and I will.
Great. I mean, I'll probably mostly just I'll just chat.
Cool.
What I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what liminal dreaming is, like hypnagogia and hypnopomia, and then I'm gonna after I've riffed about it a little bit, we're gonna do like a meditation. So I'm actually gonna try to get you to lie down and see if we can go into a hypnagogic state, and then from there. And then I'll talk a little bit. I'm going to focus specifically on ways that people use hypnagogia and hypnopomia, use liminal dream states for creativity, for accessing the visionary, and because I think that sort of fits in with what you're doing here. And I'm going to talk about some practices, and then you can once you've done the meditation, you can stay just lying down and in the space and kind of letting what I'm saying. I'm the only speaker I know who likes it when people sleep through my talks. So you can stay lying down and just sort of let it wash over you if that is, that's how you roll. And we're actually even going to talk a little bit about some practices like active imagination. You might even want to stay in hypnagogia, get up, work on your art, go back down or whatever. Just so whatever it is, whatever I'm saying or doing, please feel free to be lying down or working on art or whatever moves you. And then we'll have some questions and such. So let's talk about liminal dreaming first, hypnagogia and hypnopomia. That's here. This is my book. I know you saw the image of it, but I love the way that it kind of I love the going out and in. Like the arm that like comes into the background and disappears. I think it's really good. So the word liminal comes from the Latin limen, which is like a doorway or a portal. So a place that's neither here nor there. and the liminal dreaming is the two stages of sleep. So hypnagogia when you're falling asleep, and hypnopomia when you're waking up. And that comes from hypnos, is Greek for sleep. And agagos is going toward, and pompe is going away. So like pomp and circumstance. So when you're so like people tend to think of like awake and asleep as binary, right? It's like it's one of the classic black or white, on or off. But actually there's a really wide continuity of consciousness between them. So there's quite a lot of space between waking and sleep. It's not binary at all. And if you look like, if you talk subjectively about what the experience is of hypnagogia and hypnopomia. So hypnagogia is that as you're falling asleep, and it's hallucinatory, and often it's often non-narrative until you get to the deepest levels of it, which I'll talk about a little bit. It's sort of like a swirling, free associative kaleidoscopic view of your own memories and dreams and associations. It tends to be kind of not subjective. So an objective, like in REM dreams and the dreams of the middle night, you're still a person going through the world and having experiences. But in liminal dream states, hypnagogia, hypnopomia, especially hypnagogia, it's kind of just what's happening, right? It's kind of just this, it's not you in the world. It's just this swirling, kaleidoscopic, psychedelic world. It's good when I say that. It's sort of I'm going to keep distracting myself with this background. And so when you're falling asleep, when your arm twitches or your leg twitches, maybe you see faces turning toward you, or you hear strange sounds. It's often aural. My spouse tunes into like alien radio stations. That's hypnagogia. And then in the morning, that really kind of confusing drift, maybe you feel like you've started to form a thought, and then you realize that actually it's a dream. And and it's kind of that hazy, drifty, kind of neither here nor there space. That's hypnopomia. So subjectively, that's what they're like. Objectively, they are some of the 8 or so EEG states that you experience every day. So we all go through, certainly hypnagogia, maybe not hypnopomia, that depends on circadian rhythms, which we're going to talk about. But we all go through hypnagogia. So like right now, I'm talking and, you're all listening to it. So I'm probably I'm in beta. So my brain waves are going at like, 8 to 14 or 14 to 30. In the deepest sleep, it's like 0.5 to 3 waves, super slow. When you're super, super excited, you're in gamma, which is like 40 waves per second. So most brainwave states are like characterized by one particular sine wave. And you've all seen EEG maps. You can imagine that one wave. Well, hypnagogia and hypnopomia are the strangest brainwave states because every other brainwave state that's present is at the 4. So it's got 6 different brainwave states rather than just one, or theta has 2. So we all do it. It's, everybody is a natural liminal dreamer. I mean, it's one of the reasons it's so easy to do is because we all naturally do it. And it's subjectively, that's what it is. Objectively, it's definitely the weirdest brainwave state, but most people only spend a few minutes in it a day because most people think of it as a way station. One of the things that I hear most often, like what we were saying at the beginning here, is people saying, oh, I didn't know it had a name, or I didn't know it was a thing. Like everyone is aware of it. And one of the best things about doing the workshops and things that I do is that even if you haven't had these experiences, now that I've told you about it, you probably will, because you'll just pay attention. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's what she was talking about. It's this stage. I'm completely familiar with that. So it's visual, it's aural, it's quite unusual. It's also really a stage that involves a state that involves the imagination. So the imagination is often the portal into the experience, right? So you start to your kind of imagination opens. Your imagination is kind of like a faculty of perception. I'll talk about that a little bit. So when we do the meditation, you might find that the first thing that happens is your imagination kind of opens up. That's one of the reasons that it works so well for the visionary and for creativity, because it is really using imagination. It also helps you think outside your normal patterns. So it's, during the day, your waking mind is kind of running the show, blah, blah, blah. I got to buy tomatoes. I got to call my mother. Oh, and I want to get this thing done. So another one of the things that characterizes, and one of the key things that characterizes liminal dream states is that you're asleep to a certain degree. You have access to your dream life, but you also have waking consciousness, right? So it's being both awake and asleep at the same time. So that liminal, neither here nor there. You're neither awake nor asleep, but you're also both at the same time. So you actually go into your unconscious dream state, but you have enough waking consciousness to be aware of what's happening, to be aware of this swirl of the dream experience. It's so the encounter with dream consciousness is another reason that it's so great for creativity and problem solving. You know, you drop down into that world. You're also using kind of different neural pathways. So really interestingly, in the womb, fetuses are in REM, they're dreaming the vast majority of the time. And then newborns, if any of you are have ever spent a lot of time with a newborn, newborns are also dreaming well more than half the time. And one of the reasons that they think, that scientists think we dream, is because it turns memory, short-term memory, into long-term memory. Basically, you're laying down your neural pathways. So when you're in these dream states, when you're in, you know, like in hypnagogic and hypnopompic, for example, you actually can rewire your brain a little bit, and you have access to this different way of moving through your own mind, right? So that's another reason that it's so good for visionary stuff, for creativity. In terms of imagination, so like I say, imagine, like the portal to the experience is imagination. And it's great to think about imagination as a faculty of perception. This is something I talk about a bunch in the book. Imagination is super important, and not just like, we tend to denigrate both dream and imagination in this culture, right? Oh, that was just a dream. Oh, you only imagined that. But actually, like the Sufis considered imagination a faculty of perception as much as, like, you know, hearing or seeing, touching. And because, in fact, because you perceive the divine with imagination, it actually the most important faculty of perception. But I mean, you all know, I mean, here, you know, talking about visionary art, you all know that you totally understand things through your imagination, right? Imagination, like the mundus imaginalis or whatever, imagination is actually sort of a faculty of perception. And so that's a I love the gesture over there that was like, yes. So that's, you know, that's kind of key to what we're talking about here when we're talking about the liminal dream space. So I want to talk a little bit about circadian rhythm, partly because people were so interested in it, partly because I'm sitting here talking at 9. I'm usually not awake till 10. So circadian rhythm, like Latin circa, around dian, day, you know, circa around, you know, around a day. So the circadian rhythm is actually the thing that we have most in common with plants. Anything that is living and that's based on the sun has a circadian rhythm. And your circadian rhythm is, there's the 24-hour cycle of the sun, right? But most people don't actually fall exactly into a 24-hour cycle. There's this really great study that was done by Nathaniel Kleitman, who's kind of the father of dream research, in 1939, where he went and he lived in a cave with a graduate student, like deep in a cave for a month. So with no access to light and no clocks or whatever. And they just sort of tracked on their own, like, you know, using stopwatches and that kind of thing, what, you know, when they're awake and asleep. And it turns out that their daily rhythm was actually a little bit more than 24 hours. And so 24 hours is kind of a standard, but most of us are either kind of at it or much longer. But we still operate in terms of the sun because it's daylight and that's what you're doing. So therefore, our energy cycles all really vary depending on whether our circadian rhythms are particularly long or shorter. So about 40% of people are what's called a lark. And that is 30-hour day, yeah. And that is someone who's shorter, faster, close to 24 hours. You know you're a lark if you wake up and you wake up really fresh and you're ready to go. If, you know, at the party, you're kind of one of the first people who's ready to go. And if, when you're working, when you start working, no matter what it is you're working on, when you start working is when you're freshest and best, and then you kind of get tired. 30% of people are owls. You know you're an owl if you're the last person up at the party, if you work, if you work, the longer you work, the better you are, and you can work for really long stretches of time. You wake up late, often you're kind of pretty confused. And then 30% of people are, you know, kind of in the middle of those things. So your circadian rhythms are inherited, but you can change them. So people, again, anyone who's had kids knows, or anyone who's worked the night shift knows, or even, like Christina was saying, that she, even though she's an owl, she's been getting up early to work. I mean, it's a great thing to do to mess with your own circadian rhythms, to go into these states. And your circadian rhythms actually determine a huge amount. So like when you want to sleep, when you want to eat, when you want to have sex, when you want to exercise, when your work is best, also your dream life. So if you are a lark, if you're like have one of those really fast circadian rhythms, then often you're not going to be somebody who remembers your dreams, at your night dreams, your REM dreams. And if that's you, then hypnagogia is totally the dream space for larks. And anybody who's a lark is probably going to be easily get into hypnagogia. And often they're, if you talk to them about their dream life, their best dreams are happening in hypnagogia. If you're an owl, hypnopompia is a great dream state for you. You can lie in bed in the morning and drift. I mean, I usually, from the first time that I surface to awake to the time that I actually get out of bed is like an hour, because I'm just surfing hypnopompia. If you're a lark, you probably almost never experience hypnopompia, because as soon as you wake up, bing, you're awake. So these dream states are really working with these two like modes of liminal dreaming, really contingent on your circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythms are super important. And by the way, the world is set up for larks. Now, larks are, there's 40% of larks and only 30% of owls, but things like kids going to high school early in the morning, or everyone like going to jobs and like, you know, early morning, anyone who has a job, early morning meetings are, people think are okay, but meetings at the end of the day, people think aren't. I'm personally, I totally peg the scale at extreme owl. Like I'm really an owl. And I mean, high school was like miserable for these reasons, you know, and it's actually a thing now that sleep scientists are becoming way more aware of how crucial circadian rhythm is to our activities, to what we're doing. And, you know, now there are, for example, some high schools where kids go in shifts, you know, where some go earlier and leave earlier and some go later and leave later. And that's totally great thing to do for circadian rhythm. So we can talk a little bit more about circadian rhythm. I know that it's a thing that interests people, but basically understanding your creativity waves when things are happening. Most people get an energy dip, by the way, sometime between like 2 and 4, depending on your circadian rhythm again. And if you're interested in working with hypnagogia, which I'll talk about a bunch more, that's a really good time to do it, when you're naturally, your rhythm kind of goes down and you can go and lie down on the couch or on the floor or wherever and sort of see, and try to experiment with your hypnagogia. And then kind of, I'll give you some good practices for working with that and then using it for creativity, for doing art. So, okay. When we go into the practice that I'm going to bring you into, you may not actually find hypnagogia, and that's partly because of circadian rhythm. It's partly because of the hour, right? So you might right now be pretty awake and jazzed, or, you know, so you like actually going into hypnagogia may not happen. It may, right? It may not. But even if it doesn't, a lot of the point here is to get you to the place of like recognizing what it's like when you're going into hypnagogia. Yes, we can have a few minutes. I will give you a few minutes before we go into the practice, and which you'll need because you'll want to lie down and do all that stuff. So I'll give you that moment. So you may not actually go into the space, and don't worry about that. Like I say, what I want you to do is start to understand what the space is like, and then there are tons of exercises up on my website that you can just go and look at, or hopefully we'll have, and there's recordings of me doing the kind of meditation that I'm going to do now. So you can listen to those as well. The practice that we're going to do is based on my own meditations, things that I came up with when I was writing the book and really working a lot with hypnagogia, specifically hypnopompia too, but hypnagogia is a lot easier to work with since it happens when you're napping. And so they're for probably the last 6 years or so, it's been my primary practice, and I was spending a lot of time going into the space. So I came with a lot of meditations. And then I'm also trained in Yoga Nidra in the iRest tradition and in the Yoga Nidra Network tradition. So the meditation that we'll do is kind of a combination of those things. And like I say, the big secret of this practice is that we all naturally go into the state. So I'm going to give you now 5 minutes. Go find a yoga mat or a blankie or something so that you can get comfortable lying down. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to record over here.
Okay, let's actually try to install that thing.
I'm recording this whole thing, so if you wanted me to
Good.
I can just email it to you.
Mm-hmm. What happened? It is not. You're on audio, by the way. I love it. Everyone getting all cozy. And you'll want to be in a position that you'll be happy lying in for a little while. I'll remind you that you can stay there when I'm done.
Just as a every once in a while the Zoom meeting restarts, and if for whatever reason the Zoom meeting decides to restart while I will obviously log back in, and so just log back in. If for whatever reason it just craps out, just log back in.
Okay.
I was hoping it would do it before this, but I don't know when it happened. It just does it once every 24 hours. So hopefully we'll be fine. I'll keep an eye out.
And if that happens, everyone else should just try to do their best to stay where you are.
Yes. Well,
Uh,
yeah. We'll figure it out. Hopefully not. Just wanted to warn you in case.
It usually happens in trip 1.
Okay, good. Okay. Fantastic.
All right. So, as much as possible, settle into a really comfortable position. You can be lying down somewhere where you can hear. You can recline if that's more comfortable for you. Whatever it is, take a minute now just to wiggle around a little bit. See what you can do to make yourself just 5% more comfortable. Once we're in the practice, it's great if you can keep yourself from moving. If you really feel that you need to move, first give it a second. Just give it a second. Decide if you really need to move. And if you do, it's your practice. Go ahead and move. Just try to do it as slowly and mindfully as possible. Right now, become aware of every place where your body is touching the surface on which you're lying. Feel the contact between yourself and the surface that's holding you. Let that surface support you. Put everything you have onto that surface and know it's going to hold you no matter what. Become aware of the farthest away sound that you can hear. And now listen for the closest sound that you can hear. Is it your own heartbeat? Something else maybe, your breath? I'm going to go through and name parts of your body. And as I name each part, imagine a star, a softly glowing star on that part of your body. Or else just let my voice wash over you and drift. Your practice, there's nothing you need to. Take a small glittering star and put it on the crown of your head. Put softly glowing stars on your left eye, your right eye, your left ear, your right ear. A star on the nose and a star in the mouth. Imagine your whole head as a glittering universe of stars. Put a star on your throat and a star at the heart. A soft glowing star on your right inner shoulder, inner elbow, inner wrist, palm, a star on the tip of every fingertip of your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put a star on the back of the hand, a star on the elbow, a star on your right shoulder. Put a star on your left shoulder, inner elbow, inner wrist, palm, stars at the end of each of your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put a star on the back of your hand, a star on the elbow, a star on your left shoulder. Both arms, glowing galaxies of stars. Another star at the heart. 1 at the abdomen. Put a star on your right hip. A glittering star at the right thigh. A star at the knee. Ankle. Top of the foot. Toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put a star in the sole of your foot, the Achilles, back of the knee, right buttocks, groin. Place a small glowing star at your left hip, a star at the thigh, a star at the knee, ankle, top of the foot, toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A star on the sole of your foot, Achilles, back of the knee, left buttocks, both legs, glowing galaxies of stars. A star at your lumbar, upper back, back of the neck, and back up to the crown of your head, your whole body full of stars. As you inhale, let the incoming breath create spaces between all the little stars, like the vast space between stars out in the cosmos. With each breath you take in, a little space opens up between each star and its neighbor. The space inside you expands as the stars spread out across the heavens of the skies inside you. Feel stars spreading out until you hold constellations inside you. Galaxies of twinkling stars in the night sky of your inner universe. As you float in that starry sky, the sky inside you, the sky outside of you. Imagine those things. Imagine yourself floating out in the cosmos. Imagine the cosmos floating inside you. Breathe in the cosmos of stars outside of you into the galaxies of stars inside you. And then breathe out. And as you breathe out, relax deeply. Breathe in stars in space. Breathe out all your waking energy. Let every exhale relax your body and mind. Breathe in gently, keeping your mind soft. Breathe out, relax. Let the exhale help you sink further down toward unconsciousness, maintaining a glimmer of waking mind. And as you breathe in the cosmos and breathe out your waking energy, see if anything arises. It may be an image or a memory or a sound. You may find your imagination beginning to open. Breathe in outer cosmos into the inner cosmos. Breathe out your waking energy. And allow the dream to form, whatever it is. Memory, image, sound. Breathe that in, and then let your exhale animate whatever comes. Breathing in the liminal dream space. Breathing out your waking energy. Let it be a feedback loop. Every exhale animating the dream as it forms. And now, for 2 minutes, I'm going to leave you to drift. My voice will bring you back when it's time. Sink into the space and see what you find there. Now feel your waking consciousness slowly coming back online. Wiggle fingers and toes. Wiggle your whole body. And now, as I resume speaking, feel free to lie there as long as you want. Feel free to arise. Welcome back. This practice is concluded. And I'll give everyone just a minute to kind of come back to the space where they might feel like they're ready to listen a little bit more. I'm going to talk a little bit about different ways that people have used those spaces or use those spaces. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then I have a lot more that I want to talk about, but it's also a good opportunity for people to start jumping in. So first, let me talk a little bit about ways that people have used these spaces for creativity and for accessing the visionary. One of my favorite ways that that hypnagogia has been used is the classic Jungian active imagination. This is a great practice for creativity and one that I myself have used super often. I wrote a lot in my book using this practice. So Carl Jung, I'm sure you know, was one of the great psychologists of our era. And when he and Freud first met, like on their first meeting, they talked for 13 hours straight. And Freud was his teacher, and he called Jung my son and the anointed one or whatever. And then at a certain point, they had a break over differences in treatment, including how to deal with dreams, by the way, but amongst other things. And they never spoke again. And this was really traumatic for Jung, who was an incredibly creative person. I don't know if you've ever seen Jung's Red Book. And also he's done a lot of carvings. I actually had, I have a good friend who's an art preparator at UC Santa Barbara. And they had the Jung show there. They had the Red Book and they had a bunch of his carvings. And because she's a preparator, I got to go in off hours and really experience this art. And going in, you're like, man, this guy is a hypnagogia tripper. I mean, because I think of myself as that way sometimes. It's such a psychedelic space. And so, so Jung went through, when he and Freud basically broke up, went through a period of what he called a psychotic break, right? He basically kind of went nutso for a while. And the way that he dealt with it, and this is the origin of the Red Book, by the way, the way that he dealt with it was he came up with this practice called active imagination. And what he would do, and it's been more clarified by other Jungian analysts after, where it's, more sort of codified into this practice. But basically the practice is go into hypnagogia, go into that drifty space, and then come out of it and immediately start engaging the space creatively, whatever it is, write, draw, mold clay, record yourself dancing. I personally bead shoes, but the point is not the end product, right? And then engage with it creatively until you feel done, and then keep doing it and working on that same piece. So go back into hypnagogia once you've started whatever it is, come back out, create, continue working, engaging creatively with whatever was in your mind, with whatever happened, and then keep doing it until it's done. And that might take days, it might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years. I mean, the Red Book was a thing that he did for a very, very long time. Not only is this a way of like accessing the visionary and really bringing forward creativity, also Jung felt like it was the most psychically healing thing you could do. In fact, Jung thought that active imagination was enough, like for, in terms of therapy or whatever. If you needed some sort of psychic healing, Jung thought that that active imagination would do the trick. Another example of creativity. So a lot of people have used hypnagogia for creativity. It's very common, right? So, and also for generating ideas. So famously, Auguste Kekule conceived the benzene ring in a hypnagogic dream. Louis Agassiz figured out how to chip away stone and find fossils in a hypnagogic dream. The periodic table was conceived in a hypnagogic dream. The song Yesterday was written in a hypnagogic dream. The first chapter of Proust, of Remembrance of Things Past, is a hypnagogic dream. So this, there's this amazing space where people are going in and accessing this. And there's this great exercise, and actually several people have come up with the same exercise independently. So two really good examples are Thomas Edison and Salvador Dali had the same practice without ever knowing that the other was doing it. And Thomas Edison came up with most of his inventions with this practice. And this is what Salvador Dali used to generate his ideas for art. So what they would do is each man would put metal plate or plates on either side of a comfy, like reclining kind of chair. And then Edison would hold a ball in each hand, and Dali would hold, he's very specific, a big brass Spanish key. And and Edison kept a notebook by him for writing down ideas, and Dali kept a sketch pad. And then they would lean back and they would go into hypnagogia, And then as soon as they started to fall asleep, they would naturally let go of either the balls, Edison, or the key, Dali, and they would fall and hit the metal plate and immediately wake them. And then basically Dali would start sketching and Edison would start writing down ideas. So I've used this practice. You can do it with like a handful of change works or a jingly dog toy, or you can just like raise your arm up in the air, and as soon as it falls, whatever. And like I've written like whole sections of my book with this practice because it's such a great creativity practice. So I have a lot more, and I can keep talking, but now is like also a good time if anybody has any questions or anything they want to say about their experience or anything along those lines. Unmute yourself and jump in. I'll keep talking, but I'll give a second if anyone wants to jump in right now. That's a second. Okay, so can you hear me? Can I hear? Oh, you're muted. Okay.
No, I was just saying go for it.
Cool, awesome. Okay, so again, now from now until we decide we're done here, I'll keep sort of riffing, but jump in at any time. So okay, there's been really a tiny amount of work done on hypnagogia and hypnopompic, like astoundingly little, especially hypnopompic. You'll find almost nobody talking or writing about hypnopompic. You'll find a little bit of people talking and writing about hypnagogia. It's a lot easier to track, obviously. It's a lot easier to go into sleep labs and get people to fall asleep and then track that than it is to wait till they've been asleep for 8 hours and then try to catch the small amount of time that they're in hypnopompic. So hypnagogia is a lot more well studied, and but even so, there's very little work about it. And there's one guy named Andreas Mavromatis who wrote a book in the 80s called Hypnagogia. And it's one of the only books, besides mine, where you'll find somebody specifically talking about the topic. There's also a great book called Head Trip, which is about all the EEG states over the course of 24 hours. And he's got a great section on hypnagogia as well. So there's understood to be 4 stages of hypnagogia. And when Mavromatis talks about them, he talks about first seeing like flashes of light and patterns, and then faces turning toward you, and then an autosymbolic phenomenon.
I was totally going to ask you about this. So, because it's funny with the lights, like I never would have called them lights, but I'm like, okay, but faces
turning toward you.
I've never. Have you?
Oh yeah.
Really? Crazy.
Totally.
Okay.
And actually I had a friend whose kid was really freaked out because every time the kid was trying to go to sleep, he'd see all these faces turning toward him. And so that my friend started like sleeping with the kid, and then he started having it happen. But so actually my experience of the 4 stages of hypnagogia are actually different. I still experience 4 of them, but they're different. So I'm going to lay these ones out to you. And part of my point in saying that there's the ones that Mavromatis talks about and the ones that I talk about, which is like, obviously things are really subjective, right? There's the objective reality of EEG, et cetera. And then there's everybody's subjective experience of what is happening. So I'm going to lay out mine for you, but your mileage may vary. So part of the point of this continuity of consciousness, the fact that awake asleep is not 0-1, is not on off, but there's this continuity of consciousness between waking and sleep, is that you can be 20% awake and 80% asleep, or 80% awake or 20% asleep, or 50-50, 70-30, whatever it is. And at these different steps along the way between awake and asleep, have really different experiences. So at the very, very, very lightest stage of hypnagogia, I'm super aware. And one of the best examples of this experience was I went to see a not so good production of Carmen with my in-laws. And and so it was like, all right, I like opera, but it wasn't so good. But I still, so I was like, well, I'm just going to go into hypnagogia, but I still wanted to track what was happening. So, there's the super titles at the top of the opera. So I still wanted to track what was happening in the opera. So what I was doing was I would go into hypnagogia and into this drift. And every time I heard the music changing, I would know that the story was changing, and I would open my eyes and I would read what was up on the super titles. And then I would go back into hypnagogia again. So mostly awake, but going into hypnagogia, so into sleep. And at that lightest level of hypnagogia, there's amazing access to memory. So, for example, super vivid childhood memories, the public pool where my sister and I used to go when we were kids, the colors of our bathing suits, the smell of the chlorine, what the lockers looked like, or, memories of, playing with my cat. I'm a little kid in my bed with my cat, and the feeling of the blanket, and remembering everything I had on my walls or whatever. I mean, the access to memory at this really, really light stage of hypnagogia is really amazing. And if you're interested in trying to find that really light stage of hypnagogia, music is actually great. So if you can listen to some sort of music, or if you're the kind of person who listens to podcasts when you're sort of dozy or sleepy, that's a good one for people too. When I did my book, I learned a huge amount about people's liminal dream experiences. One of the things that I learned is a lot of people go into drift listening to podcasts or an audiobook. So I did the reading of my audiobook, and a lot of people tell me that, after the book, told me that they love to be listening to something and then going into hypnagogia. And so they'll be like, oh, I'm reading, it's a book. And then suddenly, oh, I'm in the book, and my grandmother and my dog is in the book. And, oh yeah, look, now the book is on my street. And oh wait, no, I was dreaming. So now, of course, people are doing that with my book, which it gets like extra meta. So they're like, oh, I was sitting next to you by a lake while you were telling me about the, whatever. So that's pretty cool. So, I mean, if you want to try that level of hypnagogia, try napping with music on, or with sound going, or with something that's going to distract your attention. I like to nap in public. Public napping is a great one, because often I live right near Golden Gate Park. It's a great place because you're like a little too, like, I'm not willing to go that deep in because I'm in public. So that's a really good way to access this lightest level of hypnagogia. Okay, so then go a layer down where I'm probably still more awake than asleep, but more asleep than before. So if that was an 80-20, let's say this is a 60-40. I'm a writer, so I can touch type pretty well. One of the ways that I go into this one is by putting my laptop in my lap and leaning back and going into hypnagogia, and then typing out what's happening to me as it's happening. So I love this because it's the tradition of automatic writing. And automatic writing, I love seeing people's gestures. Automatic writing, and I think of it in kind of two different tracks. There's both the weird, like John Dee channeling the angels, or channeled material where people are just letting some other spirit kind of come through them and they're writing whatever there. And then the other tradition of automatic writing I really love is the Dadaists. And basically for them, it's just imagination and language expressing itself. It's very much the active imagination idea of you're going into your own space and seeing what happens there. And at that stage, for me, there's a lot of wordplay. There's a lot of very conscious of what's happening in the outside world, even though I'm in my own dream world. And I'm actually going to read you just a short bit of one of these. Okay, so speared asparagus, cooking class. 2 Christmas tree angels hold hands. Mostly awake, but the dream gets deeper in the mouths of the little sea creatures wiggling at the bottom of my field of perception, though there's no edge. Greet and pink, a set of cat ears in the very far distance. My upstairs neighbors yell, maybe a sporting event. The sound ricochets. The word ricochet, how do I spell that? Seems like it has a CH, but not. Crazen hussy, crazier. A pulsating light off to the right. So that's just me like sitting and typing. And one of the interesting things about hypnagogia, and it's also true of theta, which is the next brainwave state down. When you first fall asleep, also where very deep meditators go, once you drop through hypnagogia, you get into theta. And in both these states, if you've got EEG monitors on somebody, you'll see that they hear what is happening outside of them. Like if there's a big sound, you'll see the spike. And in fact, your sense of hearing, like your sense of smell, never goes to sleep. And I can talk about that a little bit more. So that's the second level down, the kind of like the automatic writing. And if you want to try playing with that one, you can try the typing. You can also try that, what the dot is, just the hand on the page, writing. So then and then I pass a level where you're kind of more asleep than awake. So maybe 60-40 the other way. And this is when I start to get into the kaleidoscopic swirl of images, free floating image, memory, things, basically everything from internal state. And the way that I work with this state is I've learned to actually talk through this state. And I have a voice activated recorder. You can get like phone apps, so that they're really plentiful. They're really cheap, couple bucks. You can get an app for your phone that's a voice activated recorder, and you just keep it near you when you're in hypnagogia. And either just as soon as you wake up, you can start talking. It's a great way to record your dreams. Oh, hypnopompic too. You can leave it on overnight. But I actually eventually trained myself to talk through the hypnagogia. And so now I can sort of talk into voice activated recorder, and I have hours and hours of me mumbling out sort of my dream spaces. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but first I'm going to finish this. And then the deepest level down, you could actually, your body, I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience, your body can fall asleep before your mind does. Yeah. And that's the deepest one. And it's, I have a practice for that I call the vanishing point, where basically you're trying to catch the moment that you fall asleep. Keep your mind active enough so that you're paying attention, but soft enough. And sometimes it's hard, but sometimes I can catch it. And there's like kind of this pulling sensation as you're going into the dream. So those are sort of the 4 stages that I'm experiencing, and the deepest stages also is when you start to get slight more narrative. So the deeper you are in it, the more you might get little like a thing happening, like in a REM dream. So I'm gonna take just a moment and pause again and see if anybody wants to. There's some comments here in the side. Does anyone want to leap in now with something? I mean, I can keep riffing forever. This is my thing, but I want to give people a chance.
I'm loving this so much. I wanted to say, you touch on mapping dream locations in your book, and I love that so much. This is something that I've thought often about. There's definitely places that I return to, environments that I return to, that I now recognize when I return to them. And I'm super fascinated by, like, there are some that are obvious dream versions of real things. The theater I spent all this time in high school is one that shows up all the time. I know what it is in the dream, though it doesn't look like what it did in life. The ranch where I grew up has an entire alternate in my dream world that I return to again and again. I know it as the ranch where I grew up, though it looks totally different. I'd love if you talked about that process of mapping and just shared how you do it and what the outcome is.
Yeah, great. The mapping is one of my great passions, and I'm a cartophile. And actually, the way that I first got involved in doing dream work a long time ago was around realizing that I went back to the same places over and over again. And it's a very common experience that people have. And being in a dream and realizing, oh, wait a minute, I've been here before. And then the process of mapping. So okay, imagination again really matters here. So right now, think about if you walked from your home to the closest store. Think about the path you would take. Like, how would you describe to somebody else how to do it? So your map might say, go past the red brick house and the flowering tree and the church and the yard with the sunflowers. And somebody else might say, oh, well, you're going to pass this big, this old iron gate, and then there's going to be like 5 red houses in a row, and then you're going to see an old oak, or whatever it is, right? So the maps, our world, how we move through the world, is largely an act of imagination, right? So the external world is the external world. I mean, it's like the classic line, reality, like if a safe falls on your head, it's going to hit you. Reality is what doesn't go away if you try to ignore it, right? So I mean, there is this kind of like objective world that's happening out there, but the way that you're moving through this world is largely an act of imagination. There's this great essay by Aristotle called On Dreams. And in this essay, what he is proposing, so the question that he poses for the essay is, why do we see and hear things in dreams? Why do we have experiences in dreams? So what he posits basically is that there's the external world that we take in through our senses, right? So there's the taste of the coffee I just drank, and the sound of my neighbor's kids downstairs, and the sight of all of you, right? So I'm taking all of this into my internal world. And then most of what's happening when I'm moving through the world, so imagination, intellect, memory, dream, thought, most of what's happening when in my experience is actually me interacting with my internalized version of the world, right? So maybe later when I remember what I'm looking at right now, the screen of all y'all, there'll be the things that stand out that I remember. And so if I'm, so I'm like, oh yeah, that Zoom experience, and then the Zoom experience has come into my visual, and it's whatever I picked out, right? Or like even just hearing the neighbors downstairs, like the youngest kid, Reza, is pretty loud kid, but I like him a lot. And I'm always like, oh, there's Reza, and so like that's the thing that's really standing out, right? So that becomes the map of my internal world. So these places that you're going back to, so there's the ranch at which you grew up. I have like amalgams of the cities in which I've lived, places I've grown up, that kind of thing. And partly it's because in the dream, it's your inside world, but that's actually very well mapped. It's like, have you ever seen those like those joke maps, like the way New Yorkers see the world, and it's like New York is really big, and then there's California, and the middle of the country is just really small, right? And right, the joke being, right, but in fact, that is how we think about these things, right? You think about perception as that. So people, again, this is one of the, imagination is a faculty of perception. We're really moving through the world based on what our imagination is. And so we're really mapping everything, like the world is our maps of it, and that's internalized. So in a way, it's really no surprise that that's what comes up in the dream. One of the ways I worked with this, I have this practice called the urban dreamscape. And I started doing this when I was living in New York, and now I do it here in San Francisco. And what I do is in the morning, I think about a dream I had, and I break it down into bite-sized pieces, maybe a particular image or a feeling or a sound, whatever it is. And then I go out into what I have termed my neighborhood, and I weave the dream into some bit of architecture such that the scan of my eye will reproduce the dream. So for example, there's a place on in Coal Valley near where I live where there's like a sushi bar and then a really decorative cornice over top of it and then a drain pipe down there, for example. And it's like, okay, there's the part where there were businessmen in the water spinning in circles. And then there was a feeling of foreboding. And then there was the whales arriving. And each one of those parts of the dream, I would stand there and use like active imagination and association. And I would associate each part of the dream with that part of the architecture. So that I started using the city as a dream journal, so that like breaking down the space kind of between waking and sleeping and actually making a map of my dreams in the city, which I have a dream version of in my own dream life. So sort of like doing a feedback loop with that kind of practice and understanding. It's a good question. And it's one of the most common things when I'm talking to people about dreaming. One of the most common things that people say is, I go back to the same places. So I'm going to give you an image, and it's a good one. A really frequent association that people make is like waking is like land, and like the conscious is like the land, and the unconscious is like the ocean, right? You know, the unconscious is the ocean. That's kind of a common one. So if you think of the place where the ocean hits the land, that's where the waves are. So I love thinking about those 6 waves that are in liminal dream states. That's where the waves are, and that's where you surf. So I often talk about liminal dreaming as surfing the edge of consciousness. And there's so much in that kind of like wild space and the surfing the edge of consciousness. Anyone else want to jump in, or should I jump into another riff here?
I loved just what we were just talking about, the like the different places, right? It's just interesting then if you can also then start exploring that space, not quite like a lucid dream, but like just a hint of consciousness and like, oh, I've been here before, but I've never gone that way, you know, and then you can kind of like direct into some other space.
Fully. And
right.
2 things about what you just said. One thing is not quite lucid, but just dream conscious. And that's really, really, really relevant for what I'm doing. I mean, I studied lucid dreaming with Stephen LaBerge and did the whole bit, and it's cool. But honestly, I like liminal dreaming so much better for a lot of reasons. 1, it's easier. Everyone can do it. 2, it's weirder. It's not being a person in the world. 3, it's ceding control. It's like, you know, we're also like yang, forward brain, focused, accomplishment, do, control. You know, everyone wants to be James Bond and be cool and be in control of everything, right? But with the liminal dream space, it's really hard to control. I mean, but you can be conscious in it. So there's a big difference in my mind between dream consciousness and lucid dreaming. And usually when I'm dreaming, I do have a certain amount of awareness of the fact that I'm dreaming. You know, and so I can kind of go and explore the other spaces. I can't control them exactly. I had this one space that I've been going to since I was a little kid. And for a long time, I was like, wow, it's the only space that doesn't come from something. And I would go through a gate and then through a forest, and I would get to this house, and the house was aqua. And it had these 2 porches, one on top of the other, that went to a really distinct, fine point. And the water underneath was the most incredible colors. And I was going there from the time I was a kid. And over time, it got run down. Like at one point, like the gate broke and you couldn't go through the gate anymore. I had to climb over it or go around. And the paint was kind of peeling. And I was like, no, you know, this, I mean, I still would go there. I was like, oh, okay, but you know, now it's aging as I'm aging. And then I had this experience. I drove cross country 10 years ago to retrieve a big plant that was my great grandmother's and then my grandmother's and then my mother's. And is now mine in the other room here. So it's a big plant. So I had to drive from California to Buffalo, New York to get it. So I drove cross country, and I was driving down one, which I've been going up and down my whole life. It's the most, speaking of mapping, it's the most psychogeographically rich stretch of this earth for me. And so I climbed up to go to the Nepenthe Cafe, and I went up steps, and I went and camped in the campground where we used to go when I was a kid, which is in the Redwoods. And I went up the steps, but I usually go up around the back way. But, I was like, this time I did something I almost never do, which is I went up the front steps, and I leaned over, and I realized that the porch was like this, is 2 levels, and it was over the amazing water that's off High 1. And I was like, oh, right, the woods, the campground, the Redwoods. And suddenly it all came together. And I'd been having this dream for like more than 30 years at this point. And, watching this thing age and watching it change, being like, oh, isn't the mind freaking amazing? So yeah, and definitely, one of the things that happens for me now when I'm in places, someone there said their grandmother's house. Yeah, I dream of my grandparents' house a lot. And sometimes I'm like, oh, look, here's this passageway over here. Oh, I know there's a weird secret passageway that wasn't in the actual house over here, because I've been here often enough and I can go over there, or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think, Christina, you're totally right. You can sort of explore places a little bit and open up that space. It's a pretty cool experience.
I've never been able to lucid dream, but I often have dream consciousness where I can react to what's happening in my dream consciously, especially like if it's a nightmare or something like chasing me or something that I should be scared of and I'm afraid. And then suddenly there's like part of my mind that's like, no, you need to turn around and look at that, or open the door. There's nothing, like face it, or like stuff like that, where it's like, I'm not lucid in that way that it's described. I don't know. I've never had a lucid dream. I'm not, whatever that is, how it's described. I've never thought I've experienced something that way, but I have these moments of like something is like reacting to what's going on and I'm aware of it, and that's always really interesting. But I find that happens more and more the more I work with the liminal spaces, especially that trying to poke that moment of falling asleep is so exciting. I love doing that. I try to do that every single night. It's just like, there's something about it. I have to, and I'm sure it's like I have to be careful, because it's like if you poke it a little too hard, then you won't fall asleep. You'll just stay in that place, and then it's like, oh shit,
I've been there.
So it's just nudge it along, and then you can kind of dive off into the abyss and you're asleep. But yeah, that's such an interesting, weird space.
Yeah, I mean, and so like dream consciousness is a whole thing, right? And people say, well, I mean, when you're doing practices like this, you sort of have to have ways that you can use it, creativity and problem solving and healing, and it's great for all of these things. A lot of what I'm doing is just consciousness exploration. I'm playing with my mind because it's such a fascinating thing, and dream consciousness is a very, very real. I mean, and we spend so much of our time in it, and of course, as with anything, like you are what you practice being, right? So if you complain a lot, you get good at complaining. If you draw a lot, you get good at drawing. If you're, spend a lot of time with your pet, you develop a stronger bond with your pet. I mean, it's a very basic equation. Whatever your attention is the power. So whatever you pay attention to is what you're going to get better at. So dream consciousness is usually just a result of sort of paying more attention. But here's another interesting thing about liminal dreaming. We're talking about dream consciousness. So as I said earlier, you can talk to people who are in hypnagogia often. A lot of times they'll answer, and it's usually a non-linear conversation, right? It's not like, you're going to say, do you want a grilled cheese sandwich? No, I don't want a grilled cheese sandwich, whatever. It's like, because they're not really perceiving, but they will respond, and you can get into these weird spiraling conversations. And I have a lot of experience with this. So when a couple of years ago, my aunt very beloved aunt to whom I was extremely close was dying. And so I did deathbed, sat with her for the months that she was dying. And in the couple weeks after she lost waking consciousness, which she never came back to again, and before she went to the place where she was just kind of gone for like the week before she died, she went through a couple week period where she was in hypnagogia. And I was like, what the hell? You know, and she, you know, and she'd be like, oh yeah, I'm in the shopping mall with Ziggy Stardust and our neighbors and their talking dogs, you know, and I'd be like, well, Robin, what is Ziggy Stardust wearing? And she'd be like, oh, you know, we're walking down the street. I mean, she wouldn't exactly answer my question, but she would respond. We would be having these conversations, and she was just in this hypnagogic space. And of course, my family, I have a huge family. My family, like aunts, uncles, whatever, would be like, no, Robin, you're not in the mall with Ziggy Stardust. And I was like, just let her be in the mall with Ziggy Stardust, you know, whatever. And I later learned, like fully coincidentally, that she died in a hospice where the director of the hospice, this guy named Dr. Christopher Kerr, writes about the fact, and has just written a book that just came out a couple months ago, about the fact that dying people are in hypnagogia often. And it often gets medicated because it freaks out families. And so people are like, oh, they're delusional. And so they medicate people out of this experience. So the liminal zone is not only the zone between waking and sleep, it's the zone between conscious and unconscious. It's also, in a lot of cases, the zone between life and death. And if there's a good reason to gain facility with dream consciousness, if there's a good reason to have a certain amount of consciousness in your hypnagogic state, that seems like a really good one. You know, I mean, because we're all going to have the experience of dying, you know, and, you know, not everyone goes through it, but a lot of people do. The word liminal, by the way, did I say this already? That comes from the Latin limen, doorway or threshold, you know, and even like if you talk to the Tibetan Buddhists, who are the ones who have mapped a lot of dream experience, they're also a lot of what they're talking about is developing dream consciousness for the sake of keeping your wits together in the bardo when you're between death and rebirth, right? So finding your way around. Anyone want to jump in here on this bit?
That out a little bit is kind of the state also before you're dead. You know what I mean? It's like you can, that bardo state where you meet all your demons and stuff is very much like that space as you're dying. And this is a topic we talk about a lot. Lisa, that's here, has a death cafe also. So we've talked a lot about this over the last like several weeks of just meeting somebody in that space when they're passing away, you know, and what that entire experience looks like. And it's just, I'm grateful that I see more and more things being written about that it shouldn't be medicated. It shouldn't be, you know, it's like, stop trying to convince them that they're not wherever they say they are. Like, just let it be, you know, meet them there. Like, you know, just listen, stop trying to like fix it, you know? So it's been really, that's really refreshing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And there's actually some, I mean, of course, you know, I was saying earlier, in the womb, fetuses are often in dream and newborns are often in dream. And
so we enter in this way and then we dissolve away that also that way. It's so interesting.
Right, at both edges of like, you know, as much as they have been able to tell from the dreams of very, very young children, this guy wrote this, it's very, I mean, it's because of course it's hard to do because they can't really self-report, but as much as possible, they think that actually really, really, really little kids are having more liminal dream space, you know, before they're going into, you know, because of course, think about it, they don't really have the subject-object experience in the same kind of way that we do. And so at both edges of life, right, birth, death. The Tibetan Buddhists, of course, were the more traditional lucid dreamers. We've talked about lucid dreaming a couple times. Liminal dreams are the ones that are on the edges, like between waking and sleep. And lucid dreams happen in REM in the middle of sleep. The longer you sleep, the more REM you have, right? We sleep in like these 90-minute cycles. Everyone wakes up every 90 minutes, even if you don't notice it. And if you are like, I keep waking up every 90 minutes. Yes, you do. We all do. Everybody does. And then when you've been asleep for like 3-4 hours, you start getting longer and longer periods of REM, right? So that's where the night dreams are. And actually, I was talking about EEG. You can't tell if somebody is awake like this, like how I am in beta, or if they're in REM from an EEG. Brainwaves are the same. But anyway, the Tibetan Buddhists were talking about developing lucid dream skills to keep your wits about you in the bardo. But if you read it, actually the first step is developing consciousness of your liminal dream states. It's the ability to have facility with hypnagogia. It's the ability to, be able to go into those states. And like Christina was saying, have enough consciousness to sort of be able to look around. One of the weirder things that I do with these states, I don't know if anyone has ever had 2 dreams happening at the same time, like a two-track dream. I've gotten to the point now where I can do 6. So I'm like in a liminal dream space, and I have 6 different dream tracks, and each one of them I can see from a high level, and I can focus in on. There's one where there's this bird made of glitter, and I could see every individual piece of glitter, and I could pull back and I could see the whole bird and the sun hitting it. And at the same time, I was in this city that is not like any real city. It was just sort of like imaginal city, like a weird melty wax wash of, and zooming in like lots of like little minarets and things, but not anything that exists in reality. And then there was, and then on another track, there was a bunch of records, a satanic 70s records in an old rusting thing on the space in my grandparents' house between the sidewalk and the street. And I could flip through and look at the covers of the albums. I'm the one that had a Baphomet on it or whatever. So like, so that's a pretty weird experience, like being able to go into all of these places simultaneously while still having this experience. It's very psychedelic.
I was going to say, I've had that happen on acid. But
had it happen with ayahuasca too.
Yep. I think we had a question about the oneirogens.
Great. This is a great jumping off point for that, actually, since we're talking about substance. So an oneirogen is anything that creates vivid dreams. Oneiro is dream, gen is create, like generate, right? So oneirogens. And think about oneirogens like subtle allies, right? Like if you take 400 mics of LSD, you're tripping, does not matter. But with most oneirogens, you actually have to step forward to kind of meet the experience. But there are a lot of things that promote really vivid dreams that are interesting to play with. So there's obviously a lot of herbs and roots. Dreaming is like the original altered state, right? It's the most endogenous altered state. So for example, visionary experiences or psychedelic experiences, you can really get very similar experiences yourself just going into these dream spaces. And Native people knew this, and also traditional cultures were often working with forms of shamanism going between worlds, so that kind of psycho-pomp liminal space. So they would use different roots and herbs for this. And a lot of these are things that you can access yourself. If you go onto my website, urbandreamscape.com, you can also get there from liminaldreaming.com. I have a bunch of different websites that are cobbled together like a house with bad additions. So you can get to any one of them from any one of them. They're all going to look a lot different. But I list a lot of oneirogens there. So in terms of like herbs and roots and things, there's one of my favorites is a thing called Kalea Zacatachichi or Kalea Zacatachichi, and it's used by the Chantal people of southern Mexico and northern Guatemala. And the idea is that when you go into dream realms, you meet the spirits, the gods, whatever, and they give you teachings. But it's really hard to remember them because it's so hard to remember dreams. So most of us forget, right? So the Kalea, which you brew into the most worst tasting thing you will ever experience. Incredibly bitter. It's really awful. But it's really effective. And it gives you sensorially super vivid dreams. So sound, taste, touch, those kinds of things, super intense. There's mugwort is a very common one. So mugwort, which you can get at, you know, any health food store, probably is going to have mugwort. Mugwort is actually best for scent. So I said earlier, I was talking about scent and sound. So when we're sleeping, there are a lot of chemicals, things like acetylcholine, other chemicals that flood our body so that we don't act out our dreams, right? That would be a bad idea. And so it paralyzes us, and it specifically paralyzes, you know, the chin so that you don't talk, and the limbs so that you don't walk. Obviously, people sleepwalk and sleep talk, and that's when those chemicals aren't sort of firing correctly. But there's no reason in dreams to not have a sense of hearing or to not have a sense of smell. Therefore, those are the only senses that never go to sleep. And they make great oneirogens, great vehicles for oneirogens. So, so mugwort will give you really long, crazy psychedelic dreams. And you can get mugwort at your health food store, shove it into a sachet, even the end of a sock. If you really want to go for it, you can get some mugwort oil and mix it in with the dry mugwort and just leave it near you when you're sleeping. Push it, you know, usually when I do it, I'll wake up and it'll be far away, and I'll pull it toward me again, and I'll go back to sleep, and I'll have crazy dreams, and I'll wake up and I will have in my sleep pushed it away again, and I'll bring it back again. And then lavender is really good if you have problems sleeping. Rose is really good if you have unpleasant dreams. So like some mix of all of those things, and make yourself a dream pillow. Those are super effective. It's actually really interesting because, you know, dream practitioners have known this forever, have known that scent is really effective forever. And a couple years ago, a bunch of scientists did these studies of dream perception, and they did things like have sulfur when people were dreaming, and it would give them bad dreams, right? Because we all associate sulfur with like hell, you know, or whatever. So, or, you know, roses, and then people would have pleasant dreams, and scientists were like, wow, people are really, and we were like, yeah, we knew that. Sound is really good. So there's a guy named Robert Rich who does these 8-hour music compositions. In the 80s, he used to do these overnight events where people would come in San Francisco, where people would come and spend the night, and he would play for 7 hours. 7.5 hours, 8 hours, for like the whole course of a night. And there's, you know, there is a chart, which you see in my book, that tells you about sleep cycles, right? So you go into deep sleep early in the night, and then I was saying you go into REM more later in the night. And so he understood sleep cycles. And so he would create pieces of music that were designed to, as oneirogens. They were designed to promote really vivid dreams. And they're, you can find them online pretty easily. Somnium is my favorite one. Again, it's listed on my website, so you can go find it. And then there's a lot of other herbs and foods. There's like something called Selene capensis, which is used by the Hausa people of South Africa. It's a dried herb. It's like actually the root. It's the dried root, and you froth it in water, and you eat the froth. And it is to contact your ancestors. And it's called like Selene capensis means white ways. And people have dreams of, it's weird, but people have dreams of like wise people, and the color white shows up in dreams. And one of the things that was so interesting is when I saw Black Panther, the movie, I had seen somewhere in some article that it was Hausa, that some of the language that they were using as like, you know, the African countries, the language Hausa. And I was like, oh, so Selene capensis, like, I don't know if you've seen this movie, but there's this like, you know, dream visual herb that's slightly based on Selene capensis. You go and you meet your ancestors, and that's a Hausa thing. So, I mean, that's it showing up kind of in popular culture. You spell it Selene capensis, Silene, Selene capensis, CAP, Capensis, Celine Capensis. And like I say, if you go to my website, it lists all of these things. So, and I really love using dreaming, and in the way that I have often in my life used psychedelics to go into these visionary places. I mean, you're going to go to these weird places, but it's totally like legal and free and no hangover, and like you're down in like 15 minutes. You could talk to the police. You're totally fine. And the other one is, by the way, there's a lot of tech that you can use as oneirogen. So people play with binaural beats to bring on hypnagogia. It works for other things too, but I have found mostly for best, hypnagogia is the thing for which it works best. And there's a lot of weird tech on the market that you can get, TD, transcranial direct stimulation machines that vibrate different parts of your brain where different things happen, make that sort of learning a little bit more possible, like the Fisher-Wallace machine or the Think. So there's some that you can buy. You can download binaural beats from a lot of different websites, and take it with a grain of salt, because there's they'll say they can emulate the experience of falling in love and of orgasm and of heroin and of whatever. I'm like, I've played with them some, but I have found that they're actually pretty okay for hypnagogia. What they're doing is they're playing a beat in one ear and a beat in the other ear. And so let's say it's like playing 100 beats in this ear and 110 beats in this ear, and your brain will try to resolve these two different beats. And so you can basically make your brain waves resonate at a certain kind of pattern by doing this. And so what you're doing is you're trying to make it resonate at the pattern where you would normally be having this experience. So now it's weird for hypnagogia because hypnagogia has all that chaos. But that's one of the reasons, I think that's one of the things that's happening, because I don't think it's quite as steady as what they say it is. So I think you do get some chaotic brainwaves. So it makes it, they're good to use for hypnagogia, if not necessarily for other things. Anyone have anything they want to jump in with here? Questions, comments?
Questions? One.
Kathleen, do it. Wait, you're muted now.
Okay, got it now. Sorry. I'm really fascinated when we were talking earlier about things that change over time. You were talking about a structure, and we also segued into the idea of lucid dreaming. And I remembered having, then Christina mentioned running away. So in the beginning, there were running away dreams. And sometimes if I was really lucky, I could fly a little bit if I was running fast enough. And then they evolved into dreams where I would become aware that I had the power to fly if I could get in the right state of consciousness. So I couldn't put my finger on it per se, but sometimes I would manage to just slip in just right and then be aware that I was in a different state of consciousness, even sometimes that I was actually dreaming and like navigating through wires and things like high wires. And then I had dreams where I was starting to teach other people how to fly in my dreams. But, it was just such a clear arc of change and progress, developing skills. I remember the one where I wanted to teach other people. I was conscious that this person was going to need something tangible as a trigger for them to fly. And so I materialized a bouquet of flowers and said, okay, now when you hold this, you can fly. But I just love that idea that, yeah, there are these, parallel layers of consciousness, and we're developing in this world and we're developing in that world as well.
I had the same experience where I couldn't fly in dreams when I was a kid. I could do this thing where I would run and jump and then kind of go long distances, but then I would hit the ground again. And then I started being able to like fly, but in a vehicle. Like I would like have like the skateboard that could then fly, or like the little plane that I was standing on, which is a little dodgy, and then fly. And then eventually I developed the ability to fly in dreams. So like the maturation of self. And a lot of my early work with dreams was like the first, like when I was living in Paris in the late 80s, and it was winter, and I was broke, so I was sleeping a lot. And I had a really watershed dream, and that was a dream in which I realized that I recognized where I was, and that I had had a lot of other dreams there, and that I knew, and that I could navigate around the space. That I knew, if I knew, it was a weird dream version, but it had its own constancy, right? It had, different things that were the same. And then from working with mapping dreams, which was the first thing I ever did, I started to realize that I actually had a dream self, and that the self I was when I was dreaming, slightly different person than the waking person I am. Now, a lot of, I know now something that I didn't know then, which is that a lot of dreaming harkens back to your younger life, right? Think about it. Like a lot of places you're going in dreams are places from your childhood. You have like sort of, younger person, experiences. Well, when I was young, I was a lot bolder than I am now. I mean, I was pretty fearless, and I did some dumb, crazy things. And that is who the dream me is, right? So then I started to become aware of this dream self that I had, that had constancy, that had her own memory. In dreams, I would remember other dreams that I had had. I mean, and sometimes sometimes dreams come with false memory. Oh yeah, I was raised, up in the trees with, by ravens or whatever. In the dream, it comes with a whole backstory. And so sometimes it's not real, but I would have dreams. I would remember dreams in the dream, and when I woke up, I'd be like, oh, I actually really did have that dream. So state specific. So I started to become really aware of this self that I was dreaming. And then I had the really weird experience once of reverse lucid dreaming, where dream me came forward in consciousness when I was awake. And I was like, what the hell is this place? Oh, I'm awake. So it was like a reverse lucid dream. But I think you're right, Kathleen. I think, that, I mean, we sort of develop over time as selves. And I mean, and if you think about it, it's not surprising, right? I mean, you're having experience, you're developing as a person, you're learning things, you're becoming somebody different.
Well, there's been a recent evolution that I wanted to ask you about, which is, and actually I remembered it starting about the time actually I started going to visionary art workshops. I don't know if but going from dreams that are narrative to dreams that are so abstract, I have no words, and yet they repeat over and over and over and over. An image will just like pulse through my dreams all night long. And within the dream, I get it. Outside of the dream, I have no clue, but they've been more and more frequent. It's like, maybe this is the next stage in my evolution, but it's interesting to me go beyond narrative.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love so much about the liminal dream space, is going through beyond narrative, is just going into this very pure space, this very pure kaleidoscopic swirl of your own, whatever you have inside of you. And it actually makes for a great meditation, because there again, you're asleep enough that the forward planning yang part of your brain, I got to accomplish this, I got to do this, whatever, sort of goes to sleep. And because there's not like the sort of subject object, because there's not me sort of moving through the world, all there really is this unfolding moment of now, right? All there is the swirl of the dream, memory, association, sound, whatever. There's nothing else. And so if you can get to the place where you're just following that, where your consciousness is just following that, it becomes a very intense meditation on this kind of Aristotelian internal world, but that's what your experience is. So it's pretty trippy. I mean, and one of the reasons that I think this is, I mean, Christine and I were talking about this, that these are such excellent practices for people like you, because you're already dabbling in the visionary, you're already in this space. So the feedback loop of what you're doing using imagination, and the way that imagination determines how you're mapping and understanding your experience, and that feedback loop between imagination, external world, what's coming in, what's coming out, I mean, that it's just becomes more and more about that visionary experience, and we were talking about oneirogens. I have some, and I know a lot of people who go pretty deep into this space have worked with doing a lot of loops between the dream and the oneirogen, and then like something like an active imagination, working with creativity. Guayusa is something that the tribes in South America, often the same ones who work with ayahuasca, are working with guayusa, which is a tea you can acquire quite easily. And don't ask me to spell that one. And I knew a guy who was like, he'd drink the guayusa tea every morning, and then he like would do art, and then he would nap and then sleep. And he was like, after like 4 or 5 days of doing this really intensely, he was like, the space between waking and sleeping got really, really thin, you know. And but he said it was great. It was great for art. It wasn't as good for driving.
I was going to say, I think that's what those spaces are really interesting when you start working with like, okay, I've had a dream that's really, you know, Kathleen, like, I don't know what this is. But recalling enough of it and then entering into a hypnagogia state, that dream starts coming to life. And then you can interact with that dream in that space, and it will start doing things, right? And you're awake enough that you are, you know, it's like you're interacting with it on a different level than when you were dreaming it in the first place, but you're allowing it to open up and speak and be and change. And you can really tease out some of those, not just meanings, but like the messages that those dreams are trying to tell you in the first place, right? So that's such an interesting, like, that's kind of a Jungian, you know, that's active imagination, but like with your dream, you know, as kind of the catalyst. And I was gonna say, it's like, that's kind of how like I have a vision that inspires my artwork, right? It's just like, I just have a thing that like comes to me, but that doesn't always necessarily map out the details of like what I want to do. So I'll take that vision and then I'll drop it into my mind, like right before, like I'll kind of imagine like whatever it is that I have from the vision. I'll imagine my first vision. And as I'm falling asleep, that vision starts to change and move, and new things start coming up. It starts shifting and you know, like morphing and evolving. And it's like, if I do that for several days in a row, that's how I end up with what I end up painting, right? So you like, that's how I use it. But there's just so many, so talking to dreams, talking to visions, and allowing it to just be this, be their own thing, and really like telling me what they need to say. I find kind of,
yeah, that's great. The poet Dale Pendle had this idea of interdimensional smuggling, and we talked about it a lot. Yes. In terms of the dream world, right? Is like trying to bring things back and like breaking down the line between waking and sleep, like really coasting this continuity of consciousness with different practices. So you were saying like the meaning of the dream. I mean, I think that therapeutic work with dreams is great, but it's not what I'm doing. You know, I'm working with dreams in different ways. And so one of the things that I do is, so for example, I have a lot of dreams about being inappropriately barefoot, whether it's like I'm in like the African savannah and there's like, you know, snakes and things on the ground, or I once went to a formal event at the Icelandic consulate, you know, without my shoes on. Or recently I had one where I was in China, and it was going through a construction site, and it was super muddy, and I didn't have shoes on, and you know, so I have these weird dreams about being inappropriately barefoot. So one of the things that I try to do is sometimes go inappropriately barefoot, you know, like some place where it's not cool, really, it's weird to not be having shoes on, and I'll go barefoot into a place like this and explore what that feeling is, and you know what that experience is, and so have the continuity of the experience with the dreams. And I'm sure I keep having these dreams partly because I keep doing this, right? But it's an intense experience of being, and actually I almost always when I'm giving workshops or classes, I almost always do it barefoot for this reason. I mean, I'm mostly talking to, you know, to hippies or whatever. I mean, or whatever, at festivals or whatever. But sometimes I'm at like straight conferences and I'm still doing it barefoot, and it's like, it's a little weird. It's a little weird. But you know, but it's a way of really working with the dream experience. And I think you're right, Christina, like hearing what it has to say to me, like, you know, and it's like, and the meditation, you know, I mean, I grew up in hippie houses, and I didn't really start wearing shoes regularly until I was, you know, almost 30, you know. So I mean, you know, so I have a lot in my mind space about being barefoot, and probably a lot of things that I picked up from other people that I didn't even realize were there, or whatever, that express themselves. I don't know what it is. I mean, or, you know, I don't know, or grounding. I don't know what it is, but actually interdimensional smuggling, or trying to go the other way. I sometimes try to summon my VW van in dream space, you know, is kind of like, you know, like little, you know, can I do it? You know, or like I was talking earlier about using the city as a dream journal, the urban dreamscape practice, very much about breaking down this space and, you know, bringing things from one between the places, and using that, listening to that. We've only got like 7 minutes left. I want to make sure that if anyone else has a question, I mean, I can keep riffing, but I want to make sure that, see if anyone else has any questions or anything. I mean, I've been doing a lot of talking. If anyone has anything they want to toss out here.
I don't necessarily know my question, but I am curious your thoughts on schizophrenia and dream states, and if there's any correlation there, and just
It's an interesting question. No, I'm not going to say I can speak specifically to schizophrenia, but I can speak to different kinds of mental illness and dream state. You know, there are people who have a hard time going in and out of dream state. One of the questions that I get, you know, at classes and workshops or whatever, is somebody saying, what you're talking about is great, this hypnagogic stuff, but actually I want out of it. You know, I'm going through this all the time, and my problem is I can't get out. So there's, you know, of course nobody really knows how human minds formed, but there are some theories that the space between dream and waking used to be a lot more fluid than it is now. Maybe people didn't differentiate, you know, like, again, it's a continuity of consciousness. And it may be that, you know, we have a stronger differentiation than, you know, what, you know, has historically happened. So, you know, there definitely are people who have a hard time moving in and out of dream space, you know, and people who are seeing scary monsters, you know, I mean, even though they're in waking consciousness, you know, are probably having some sort of, you know, I mean, and again, the continuity of consciousness between waking and sleep, imagination is the doorway to it, right? So there's you know, our rational thinking right now, I'm going blah, blah, blah. And then that will drift into imagination. So like right now, I'm probably in beta brainwaves because I'm talking idea, blah, blah, blah. The next thing down is alpha, slower brainwaves. And those are what you get when you're like daydreaming. You're sitting and kind of drifting. That's also often when your imagination opens, right? When you imagine yourself, you know, oh, you know, maybe I'm, you know, thinking about my childhood, or maybe I'm thinking about what might happen if I did this or whatever, right? Imagination really opens up in that brainwave state, and then you go sort of into the hypnagogia. So the continuity of consciousness, you know, between waking and sleep really has imagination, and then after that has the hypnagogia, if you can be that linear about it. And so I think that people with mental illnesses are ones who have a really hard time differentiating between imagination, hypnagogia space, you know, and where people are talking to them. And, you know, and that's such a hypnagogic experience, by the way. It's very oral. For a lot of people, it's primarily a sound thing. And I hear voices whispering in my ear in hypnagogia all the time. You know, voices, different accents, different kinds, like levels of authority to the voice, like say something in my ear, you know, like shining sapphire, like, you know, like some announcer voice in my ear or whatever. So, I mean, I think that there's definitely a correlation between those, but I don't know much about it beyond that.
Yeah, thanks. I was just curious.
I'll just hazard I'm going to just throw something out. I did a lot of overnighters when I was in college because there was just not enough time for all the partying and the work I needed to get done. And sleeping was not priority. So the longest I had kept by now I had been doing about 3 all-nighters a week. So that's a lot, right? Like that's a lot of So by the time I got to kind of my finals week, I stayed up for six days in a row. So that's 5 nights without sleep, almost 6 nights, because I ended up falling.
Oh, I've done 3 a few times, but that's long.
6. Yeah. So I would hazard, just based on that experience and kind of all the work that I've done with dreaming and now, like, you know, working in these liminal states, is that at some point your brain starts to just throw in the liminal and the dream, no matter what's going on. It doesn't matter if you're trying to stay awake, you are going to be dreaming. So the amount of hallucinatory dreams that I was experiencing in complete waking consciousness by the end of that was profound. I mean, I don't recommend anyone doing this unless they really, really, you know, you want to go there. But it's an experience I will never forget. There are interdimensional spider beings that just start taking over. The amount of auditory hallucination, like that's the kind of first thing to go, is you start like really, really hallucinating auditorily or dreaming. You know, it's like, I called it hallucination, but it's really like your brain just starts like really getting unhinged. So there is something to that. You know, there's something about like when the faculty that like kind of keeps us like on the straight and narrow gets a little loosey-goosey. There is some
there.
shit. Yeah, that happens. Yeah. So that's interesting. So there could be, I'm hazarding there's something to that, right? That there's like, you know, like our kind of mean brain that like we function with, that like the you know, some average amount of people on the earth kind of ascribe to like reality, you know, and there's that range of stuff on either end. And I'm sure that if you get closer and closer to that range, or that faculty of what keeps you on that straight and narrow path, you know, gets a little thinner,
Yep.
you know, for some people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I want to be conscious of all of our time. This has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun for me.
Thank you so much. I loved the meditation, and that was such a yummy like practice. I absolutely love it. And yeah, I will send you the recording.
So, I tweet a dream a day. I've been doing it for 11 years as at Oneirofer, ONEIROFER. You can find a lot of exercises and meditations, free, easy, on my website. Liminaldreaming.com is a great place to go. And you can contact me through those things. And I love hearing about people's liminal dream spaces. So
did I spell that right in the chat?
Yep, I see that. Great.
Okay. So I posted your website. I posted all the things, so everybody's got that information, and then we will find you on Twitter. And thank you so much, Jennifer. This was an absolute
sweet dreams, everyone.
blast. Thank you. Bye.